What if I told you that giving you everything you ever wanted, free food, unlimited housing, and perfect safety, is the fastest way to guarantee your absolute destruction? Imagine a world with no war, no starvation, and no disease. You would probably call it paradise, but science has another name for it: Universe 25. Today we are going back to the late 1960s to look at one of the most controversial and terrifying experiments ever conducted. An experiment that did not use weapons or poison to destroy society, but instead used extreme luxury. The man behind this was an ethologist named John Calhoun. He wanted to know what would happen to a society if all of its natural problems were suddenly solved. So he built a massive enclosure, specifically designed for mice. It was an absolute utopia. The temperature was always perfectly comfortable, there were infinite supplies of food and water, there were zero predators to hunt them, and no diseases to wipe them out. The enclosure was designed to comfortably hold over 3,000 mice. He started the experiment by introducing just 4 healthy breeding pairs, 8 mice in total, placed into a world of absolute abundance. At first, everything went exactly as you would expect. The mice were happy, they began to breed, and the population exploded. Every 55 days, the population doubled. This was the golden age of Universe 25. But Calhoun noticed something strange happening as the population approached 600. The growth started to slow down. The utopian dream was beginning to show cracks, even though there was still plenty of physical space and infinite food. You see, in the wild, mice face constant struggles. They have to fight to survive, to find food, to defend their territory, and to protect their young. These struggles give their lives a purpose and a structure. But in Universe 25, all of those natural challenges had been completely removed. There was nothing to fight for, nothing to overcome. As the population grew, all the meaningful social roles within the society were quickly filled. There was no new territory to claim. The older generations were not dying off because there were no predators and no diseases. This meant the younger generations had nowhere to go and no roles to fill. They found themselves trapped in a crowded world with no purpose. This is when the paradise rapidly turned into a nightmare. A phenomenon Calhoun called the behavioral sink, a total collapse of social behavior. It started with the males. The young males who had no territory to claim and no roles in society became lost. In nature, they would have left the colony to find new homes, but here they could not leave, so they just gathered in the center of the enclosure. They became completely apathetic. They stopped trying to mate, they stopped trying to socialize, and they just sat there. But the peace did not last long. Because of the extreme overcrowding and the sheer boredom, these young males began to snap. Out of nowhere, they would suddenly attack each other with extreme violence for absolutely no reason. They would bite and tear at each other, leaving many of them covered in severe scars and wounds. This violence was not over food or mating rights. It was a purely psychological breakdown born out of uselessness and hypersocialization. But the males who owned the territories were not doing much better. Normally, a dominant male would fiercely defend his area and his females, but in this overcrowded utopia, they simply became exhausted. There were too many interactions, too many encounters, and too much stress. The alpha males eventually just gave up. They stopped defending their territories and they abandoned their families. Because the males completely failed in their protective roles, the burden fell onto the females. The mothers had to become highly aggressive to protect their nests from the constant invasions of the wandering, chaotic males. But this aggression spilled over. The mothers became so stressed and overwhelmed that they began to attack their own children. They would kick their babies out of the nests before they were ready. Many mothers simply abandoned their young entirely. Infant mortality skyrocketed to over 90% in some areas of the enclosure. The fundamental bond between mother and child was completely destroyed, not by a lack of resources, but by the psychological weight of a crowded, effortless existence. And then came the final and most terrifying phase of Universe 25. The emergence of a group that Calhoun called the beautiful ones. These were a new generation of mice that completely withdrew from society. They refused to fight, they refused to mate, and they refused to interact with anyone. They spent their entire lives just eating, drinking, sleeping, and grooming themselves. They had completely smooth, unscarred coats, hence the name the beautiful ones. They looked perfectly healthy on the outside, but on the inside, they were essentially dead. They had lost all complex behaviors. They lacked the ability to handle stress, to form bonds, or to contribute to society in any way. They were physical bodies devoid of any social or psychological spirit. They isolated themselves entirely from the chaos around them, living in their own little bubbles of comfort. By this point, the population had peaked at around 2,200 mice, well below the maximum capacity of 3,000. But the society was already dead.
the birth rate dropped to absolute zero. No new mice were being born. The existing mice were either violently insane or completely withdrawn like the beautiful ones. Even when the older mice began to die off and the population numbers dropped, the society never recovered. The mice had lost the behavioral capacity to rebuild. They had forgotten how to be mice. They had everything they could ever want physically, but psychologically they had been completely destroyed by the absence of challenge. Eventually, the last mouse died. The entire utopia had collapsed into total extinction, despite having an endless supply of food, water, and perfect safety until the very end. So what does Universe 25 mean for us? While we are not mice, many sociologists and psychologists look at Calhoun's experiment as a dark warning for human society. Look at our modern world today. We are living in an era of unprecedented comfort and convenience. We have more food, more entertainment, and more safety than any other time in human history. Yet we are also seeing record levels of anxiety, depression, and social isolation. Look at the massive rise of urbanization, where millions of people are packed tightly into massive cities, surrounded by thousands of others, yet feeling completely lonely and disconnected. This phenomenon perfectly mirrors the overcrowding and hypersocialization seen in the behavioral sink. Every day we are bombarded with digital interactions on social media, completely overwhelming our psychological capacity to process them, just like the exhausted alpha males in the experiment. Look at the modern trend of extreme social withdrawal. In Japan, they call it hikikomori, where hundreds of thousands of young people completely isolate themselves in their rooms, refusing to work, study, or interact with the outside world. They sit in comfort, consuming entertainment and food, perfectly matching the exact behavior of the beautiful ones. They have withdrawn from the challenges of society to live in a state of isolated self-preservation. The scary truth is that struggle and challenge are not just obstacles in our lives. They are the very things that give us purpose and meaning. When you remove all friction, when you make life too easy, when you provide a world of absolute effortless comfort, you remove the need for innovation, connection, and resilience. You create a society that forgets how to live. The destruction of Universe 25 shows us that utopia is a dangerous illusion. If we continue to chase a life of zero resistance and absolute comfort, we might just be walking into our own behavioral sink. We need challenges. We need problems to solve. We need meaningful roles to play in our communities to survive both mentally and physically. We must find purpose in a world that constantly tries to make things easier for us. If this story made you question the way we live today, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on Universe 25 and whether you think humanity is heading towards its own behavioral sink. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and I will see you in the next video.